push. Congresswoman Yvette Herrell is joining us now. Good morning.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Oh, I was just on one of my silly rants about, trying to kill the oil and gas industry. And, I was at the hot air balloon in Artesia event this past weekend, and I joked with somebody. I said, well, where's the electric balloons?
That's pretty great. Yeah, I got to tell you, this is just so crazy, that here we are, even after seeing what this has done to our economy in terms of the cost of fuel, cost of getting goods and, food to grocery, all these things, it's hitting every one of us. And yet still this president and Democrats want to demolish and get rid of the industry as a whole. It makes no sense whatsoever.
No, and that's what I was saying, Congresswoman, is that you can't build an electric car without oil and gas. You can't drive on roads in your electric car without oil and gas. You can't get the components that we need to make the cars without oil and gas. And I was having a conversation with Linda Stevens from Clean and Beautiful on the radio Friday, and I jokingly told Linda, I said, you don't understand. We have to save the planet at all costs. It doesn't matter what it costs. It doesn't matter. We have to save the planet. And in essence, what we're doing, at least in my opinion, Congresswoman, we are destroying the planet in order to save the planet. And it just doesn't make any sense. And
you're exactly right. And, I say it all the time. If it's really about environment, then why in the world would we ask OPEC countries or countries who do not have those environmental regulations like we do here, why would we ask them to produce oil? I mean, unless everybody's going to be, globally on the exact same page, which that is never going to happen. Do you think China for a minute is going to listen to what our environmentalists say over here? They don't care because they're going to work on their energy independence. That's why they're building so many coal power plants. But the other thing that I like to talk about that people do not realize, it's the byproduct. Think about it. It's not just the car and the thermostat. Think about how many medicines, plastic, clothes, makeup, sport equipment, medications. I mean, all of these things, batteries, these things we take for granted every single day. And here we are, if we get rid of the industry that actually has the byproduct, the petroleum product in those items, what is this world going to look like? I mean, we're going backwards, way backwards, because no one's realizing that they're going to have to give up a lot of conveniences and comforts if we absolutely get rid of the oil and gas industry as a whole.
Now, I know generally when we have you on, we don't get into the campaigning aspect of it, but tomorrow is Election Day, and you do have an opponent. Is this a contrast, your position on the energy policy our country should have? How does your, I hate to have you ask you to speak for your opponent, but he's not here. Yeah. Is this a contrast, one of the contrasts between you and your opponent as people think about who they're going to vote for tomorrow?
Yeah, one of the many contrasts, because he has said he's against fracking. He has quoted, and we've seen the quotes, he has said it in meetings that the industry ought to be eradicated. He believes in keeping fossil fuels in the ground. This isn't just a hit on, the budget and American security. This is about the 130,000 jobs connected to the industry. This is about the community of, Carlsbad and Hobbs and Artesia, where so many industries really thrive because of the oil and gas industry. Absolutely, and he's just happy to trot alongside Joe Biden, who's now been saying they're going to get rid of all coal power. They're going to get rid of all of the drilling. When you have a president out around the country talking about getting rid of all coal power, all of, the energy in terms of oil and gas stays in the ground, this should be very frightening to everybody, not just because of the communities that, rely on the industry in New Mexico, but as a nation. Look what happens now in Europe when they're being rationed by how much energy they can use. Really, do you want somebody telling you when and how much energy you can use for your car, for your home, for your business? This is very frightening on so many levels that we would even have a president that would go against the energy sector that is so important to national security, global standing, and for everybody in America, this is going to impact their lives in a dramatic way.
Oh, it sure
It's very scary.
it is,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to be that way. That's what's so frustrating about it. It's not like we don't have any more oil and gas, or we don't have any coal, or we don't know how
Right.
to make a safe nuclear power plant. We know how to do all of that, but for
Right.
some reason, we're telling us that we can't. For some reason, we're telling us that we can't do that.
It makes it makes no sense at all. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, let me ask you this, Congresswoman. The district that you're in that has changed after the redistricting. Some of the places that I've looked at have called it a toss-up district or a leans Democrat district. What has your experience been campaigning across the district and meeting all the new voters that are in your district? What are you hearing on the street, and how do you think this is going to manifest itself tomorrow?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. It's been an incredible journey, and getting acquainted with the new voters who maybe don't know me that well. What I have found is, and I sit down and visit with them at a round table or at a shop or, wherever we meet, but I tell them, we take the far right and the far left, just that rhetoric out of the way, and have conversations about what's important to them. It's the same thing district-wide. It's the cost of fuel. It's the cost of groceries, this crazy crime rate, the open border, schools. I mean, it doesn't matter the party. Everybody in New Mexico is thinking the same thing. We are worse off than we were 2, 4, even some of us 6 years ago, 10 years ago, because of this one-party rule. And a lot of the people I'm talking to, Democrats, independents, Republicans, are business owners. They're feeling it in their ability to even make a living. I've got a couple of folks that have told me they may have to shut their doors, even though there is a demand for their product. They don't have the employees that they can keep their doors open. And these are Democrats. They also understand the values that we share, which is, I think, most importantly, it's faith, family, freedom. Those are things that are very important to us as Americans. And I've had many Democrats say that is exactly how we feel, our family feels, but nobody's talking about it. So I think that there's a lot more we have in common. I think Democrats have underestimated, and especially with that redistricting, I think they underestimated, one, the intelligence of New Mexico people who don't just go along to get along, who actually can think for themselves, can see how this inflation is hurting them, the crime rates are hurting their families and their communities. They can see this. Nobody needs me to come along and go, hey, you're paying more at the pump. They already get it. But they are also wanting more in terms of transparency and solutions out of their government, all levels. And the commitment to America will do just that. And we've laid that out nationwide. If we have solutions, we don't just come and say, hey, you're paying more at the pump, we're going to fix it. We say, this is crazy, and this is how we fix it. And we've got a plan, and I think people very much respect that and appreciate that we have a plan. So I'm just hopeful people will be praying about who they want to vote for, but they'll absolutely think about voting for their values, which are so important. And the moral fabric of this country has just been ripped apart, and it's time we just put Americans back in place. We get our priorities straight in Washington and think about the people who absolutely send us to Washington to represent them. They don't work for us. We work for the people, and I think we need to reestablish that right away.
That would be fantastic. So let me ask you this, because you mentioned the plan for America. Say the Republicans do take back Congress, House and the Senate, which is looking likely. Obviously, we don't know until tomorrow night.
Yeah,
or
we
maybe,
don't know, but yes.
Yeah, but pretty much everybody's saying that that's a likely event. You still have President Biden in the White House, who will sign just about anything. They bring it to him as an executive order. I mean, he even got the debt forgiveness for the college passed through Congress. He thinks that anyway. That's what he said the other day. But
yeah.
So how does this work for the next 2 years with a president that can executive order just about anything that he thinks that he needs to do? What do you envision happening over the next couple of years to try to correct some of these things?
Well, the first thing we know we can do is the House will control the purse strings, and that's the biggest thing going right now, because over the last 22 months, Democrats in the House have passed many spending bills, and in fact, $10 trillion over what the Congressional Budget Office had laid out for a baseline for funding federal government. So that's what's part of our problem. In fact, we can point to this overspending, and that's why the inflation is so high. We can stop that immediately. I mean, that is one thing we will be able to do. It's the purse strings. Then the next thing we want to do is introduce the legislation to ensure that our parents have the rights to be involved in their child's education. And if he's going to run for re-election, the truth is there are going to have to be policies he's going to have to sign, like this Parents' Bill of Rights, where parents can be involved and go to school board meetings without being investigated by the Department of Justice or the FBI. But the other thing, too, is the oversight. I mean, no one's going to try to, impeach President Biden, but who they will be looking at and going after is, say, Mayorkas for this border crisis that we have going on. We will be able to control that. And so the purse strings are the very most important thing. And we've worked all over the country with policies that will work for the American people and the American industries that are important to us. And we know if this election works out right, we have the people on our side. And so it would be very difficult for Biden to, veto every single bill that comes across his desk, especially knowing that the American people feel very different. And I think it also helps New Mexico because, when Mark wins, we have a partnership in the House and the Senate on the federal space. We look at New Mexico and see it's the same thing. One-party rule, horrible policies that hurt our businesses, our families, our kids. Well, there's not going to be that, that safety net for the governor. When Mark gets in, it's going to change dramatically. And so I think we're going to see a big change on the state of New Mexico as well. And that's why it's so important that we have the partnership between federal, state, and local elected officials. But, yeah, most importantly, it's the purse strings where we can stop this craziness and expose these things. In fact, just this last week, the Department of Interior put out a report, 500-page report. So I doubt very many people have taken the time to go find it and read it. But in the report, it actually says that these policies are hurting our energy space and that they are keeping the prices driven up for consumers, for business owners, operators, for everybody. They know that what they're doing to energy is hurting the American people. They admit it in the report, but yet they still refuse to just, like you say, turn the blind eye and then talk about closing down even everything coal. I mean, this makes no sense, and we are positioning ourselves for such weakness that it's not fair to the American people.
No, you're exactly right, and it is kind of an interesting thing. Let me ask you this: as far as an executive order, if the president, if a bill is passed and he vetoes it and it can't be overwritten, or maybe it does, that would be a good thing. But on the executive order front, is there anything Congress can do with regards to executive orders? And the reason I ask is when Obama was president and there'd be a challenge to his executive orders, the courts would rule in his favor. When Trump was president, there would be a court challenge and the courts would rule against the administration. It was the most confusing thing that I've ever seen in my life, and you can't always rely on the courts. Is there any action Congress can take to rescind or stop an executive order?
Yeah, and I don't know the exact answer to that. I know there are going to be executive orders that are going to be questioned and challenged, and especially like the spending one for the college tuition, that's going to go to court for sure. But it's just out of control. And I know we've had conversations with our team and some other members of Congress, and I don't have the exact answer to that. But we've got to figure out a way to, rein in this out-of-control president. It's crazy what we're seeing. But again, I think people are praying about it. I think that people are recognizing what's happened to our nation. I think people are now going to press for accountability because it's impacting all of our industries, all of our families, all of our workers, everybody. And I think that we're going to see a little bit of a movement, not just, I hope, in the form of a red wave, but just accountability and really press in on what these policies look like. But the oversight piece will play a very important role because over the last 18, 20 months, we've requested on the Oversight Committee to have a number of federal department heads come into the committee to talk about, Health and Human Services, talk about with Mayorkas or talk, to others about the pandemic, about other things. And that has fallen on deaf ears. And I think when we have the majority, obviously, we'll be able to bring these people in. We'll have the power of subpoena. Nancy Pelosi took that away from the ranking members. Normally, both the high-ranking Republican, or the minority member, and the Democrat, the chairman, would both have subpoena power for committees. She took that away, so only Democrats could subpoena. Now, we requested a ton of subpoenas for different people like Mayorkas and others, and they just ignored them. So, it's been frustrating as a member of Congress as well, just like it is with, you're mentioning the courts. There's no continuity. It's one way for one party, another for somebody else, and that's why all of these people that are getting elected, there has got to be some accountability, some transparency, and people that are willing to stand up and uphold the oath of office, not the party, the office that they take.
That's right. And one of the things I know you've been involved with is the border. You mentioned earlier, we've got people looking for workers, yet we have this really low unemployment, yet we flooded the country with 2 million people.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. And then you probably just absolutely get frustrated when you hear people like the vice president or other people say our border is secure. What can Congress do immediately upon taking over in January to fix the border problem that we have right now, and just this wide open border that is just destroying so many communities across the country?
Yeah, it all goes back to the purse strings. Because remember, Congress will have control over the budget. They will have control over the budget for every single one of these departments. And I can assure you that there will be departments that we're going to want to keep their funding in play. We will be able to, can you imagine, cutting somebody's budget to the point where they actually are going to be very frightful of what this looks like for them? Because we know there's fraud, waste, and abuse. We will have the leverage in the form of the budget, in form of the dollar, the purse strings. We can stop these one-party rule policies that are overspending and killing. That's a tax on everybody. This infrastructure bill, or the Reduction Act, Inflation Reduction Act, that had 87,000 IRS agents.
Yeah.
We're going to move those agents. We're removing that and putting those dollars into law enforcement. We will have control over the purse strings, so we can make these decisions and force these things, and that's how vital and how important the majority will be. Secondly, just getting the gavel out of Nancy Pelosi's hand, because this isn't governance. It has been so ridiculous. They still have proxy voting, so you don't even have to be there. You can have somebody vote for you. They still have committee hearings that are done by virtual, which is crazy. The Senate's not doing this, but the House does, and you'll be sitting on a committee meeting and somebody on the committee's out on a boat somewhere. This isn't governance. This isn't working for the people. And it has been a complete disaster. And I've been so disappointed to see really how our government functions. But it even goes beyond that. Look at what they're doing with these, pushing now banks not to invest in or not to help bring loans forward for the industries that they don't like ag, like oil and gas. This is a much bigger problem than just what we see on TV or we talk about. We're just scratching the surface. This is really a scary thought of how much overreach this federal government has on everybody. And that we've got to get under control. We've got to expose it. And people need to see exactly what's going on with their federal government when it comes to banking, this overregulating, these surveys they're sending out to people, to companies all over the place. If they have any type of fleet of vehicles, how many are electric? What's the emissions? What's their carbon footprint? This is nuts what's happening, what they're doing to the American worker and the American business owner.
No, it's crazy. Last question for you, Congresswoman, before we run out of time. With everything we've talked about and everything that's in the news, there's still a lot of people that are just frustrated, and they say, why should I even vote? My vote doesn't matter. They're going to monkey with it, whatever it is. Why is it so important for people to get out and vote tomorrow?
Well, let me give a couple of reasons. Well, number one, because it's such a privilege and a right that so many countries around the world don't have what we have here. But number two, I would tell you two more things. My friend Marinette Miller Meeks, she's a congresswoman from Iowa. She won in 2020 by 6 votes. They did a recount in a federal race. They did a recount. She won by 6 votes, and she is a sitting congresswoman. If those 6 people had thought, my vote doesn't count, I'm not going to the poll, she wouldn't be there. The other thing that is even more important than that is And I've heard it too. People are a little bit timid, or they don't want to go out. They don't think it matters. Well, you know what? If you don't want to go out and vote for yourself, then at least have the courtesy to vote for those Gold Star families who understand the price of freedom. Because if it's not for our veterans and for our service members who fight to keep this nation free every single day, and look what we've been through as far as our history, there are a lot of Gold Star families that understand what freedom costs. And I say, at least for the courtesy of recognizing their sacrifice for this country, exercise your right to vote. It is so important. I mean, for our future generations and for the sheer direction of our country. And really, if more people would get out and vote, we wouldn't see all these questionable issues come up, because no one expects a lot of voter turnout, and that's part of our problem. You know, we have low voter turnout. How about we surprise everybody tomorrow and get everybody to the polls and really vote our shared values, remembering that it's, faith, freedom, family, and really surprise the poll watchers, and let's turn it around, and we can start by doing it tomorrow, stake our claim, and start taking our country back.
Excellent. Congresswoman Yvette Herrell, good luck to you tomorrow. We'll be keeping a close eye, and I'm really going to miss you as my Congresswoman since I live in Artesia.
I'll still call in and talk to you once in a while.
Well, of course. We have
You know what I say? Well, I say this. I don't care how they drew the line. I love New Mexico. I'm born and raised here, and we're going to be the voice of the industries and the people that want a voice in Washington, whether they have an actual representative that believes like they do or not. We're still here. So I'll still call in and chat with you. And, we keep just praying about the court case.
Well, that's true.
In January.
That's true.
Yep, they'll hear that court case. So there's a chance that we could maybe turn that thing around, which would be so nice, because it's just such an injustice what they did to the communities and counties and industries of interest. And to chop up the southeastern part of the state the way they did is so unfair, because you've got me who's all in and a pro-energy person, and then, both Stansberry and Fernandez are not. And it's just unfair to the people that really have invested so much of their lives in our state to produce this, energy for us and for the nation, the world. So, but we're still going to stay involved and intact and in communication. So I'm only going to be a phone call away.
All right. That sounds great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And we'll talk to you again here real soon, right after the election.
Sounds great. Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot. Congresswoman Yvette Herrell checking in. And again, Election Day is tomorrow. If you haven't voted already, 7 to 7, the polls will be open, and we need everybody to get out and vote, especially from this part of the state, so that we can ensure that our representatives represent our interests, whether here in the state or in Congress.